Episode 122 Above Ground Podcast, Scars with Benjamin Lerner.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Are you ready to lace up your boots, throw up your horns, and jump into the pit? Then let's stomp the stigmas of mental illness. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now, Will Foley and Timothy Patrick.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast.
Above Ground Podcast, because you can't serve below.
That's right. You down with TPP?
Yeah, you know me.
What's going on, Timmy? How we doing this week, buddy?
We're doing.
Yeah, we're all doing.
Doing a little slow, but we're doing.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little sluggish myself. We are joined this morning for another interview, and I am really, really stoked about this one. We are joined by songwriter, piano player, rapper, and DJ, Benjamin Lerner. It's awesome to have you here, Benjamin. Thankful that you were able to join us this morning, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm grateful to be alive, grateful to be sober, and grateful to be able to spread the message of recovery. What can I say?
Great-grandfather is Irving Berlin, which must cast a huge shadow on a musician like yourself, and especially a talented musician like yourself. I checked out a bunch of your album Clean on Spotify, and I watched some of your videos, and I'm like, you remind me of Macklemore. So forgive the comparison, man, but that's the only thing I have to go on.
Dude, Macklemore is awesome. I'll take it. He's a wonderful lyricist, and he's also incredibly open about his challenges with addiction and mental health. So I will take that comparison and run with it. I play him a lot on my show, and I love any rapper that is open enough to share about where they're at with unflinching honesty, and he always brings that to the table.
That is awesome, man. And I'm glad I didn't offend you by that, because I found his lyrics to be very, very insightful. Like his music is amazing. And then when I listened to your songs, I was like, I can hear you have that similar delivery, and you have that real, like, I could hear you writing a Macklemore song if that goes right with that.
Well, Mac's a dope lyricist, so I'm sure he doesn't have any real hip hop. So I'm sure he doesn't have any ghostwriting positions open. But if any hip hop artist wants to ghostwriter, I guess my services are available. I don't know, but I'm definitely inspired by underground lyricists, and on the West Coast, Macklemore definitely represents that. But my favorite thing about his music, and any rapper, whether they're in recovery from a chemical dependency or codependency or any type of mental health issue, is that hip-hop to me has always been about telling stories and talking about raw realities, whether that's, the earliest roots of hip-hop from the Bronx, dealing with the social issues of the late 70s, early 80s, Cool G Rap, Rakim, all those cats talked about what was going on then. And what I'm seeking to do with my music and, my radio platform and my columns is just tell it like it is in every sense. And like you said, addiction of all kinds and mental health concerns usually go hand in hand. And you touched on the Irving Berlin piece. And I guess the best way to put it is that even before I was an alcoholic or an addict, I was addicted to approval. And I've always kind of struggled with sensory overload, as it's come to be called, my entire life. You can say a lot of different things. You can complicate it as much as you want. But the bottom line is that I was diagnosed with Aspergers Syndrome. And I don't like to use labels too much because they're kind of limiting. But what it means to me is that I don't really know what people are thinking, and I'm not the best at reading social cues. So I kind of snowball into this crazy over-the-top vision of the world just kind of being out to get me. And it's not so much paranoid as it is uncertainty, but that uncertainty manifests in compulsions of various natures, be they chemical or behavioral. And so on a daily basis, I have to find non-chemical ways for me to just detach from that and be able to center myself in the moment. So recovery in terms of chemical abstinence has done that for me, but music and words also do that for me because they allow me to ground myself in my reality and understand and break down what I'm going through in various ways. So to me, that's what music is all about.
That's awesome, man. And your music certainly speaks to that, man. Your lyrics are very, I mean, you know exactly what you're talking about. There's no smoke and mirrors in that. It's right there, full front, right in front of your face. And I have to say, you know, it's great that somebody that has your scars can walk around and think that they're beautiful, man. That line about scars being the story, like on a postcard, like I was like, yeah, that's great. That's a killer fucking line, man. No doubt about it.
Thank you, man. I mean, I what's interesting is that the hook came after the verse for that song. The verse I actually wrote when I was 3 years into recovery. And of course, you know, my musical partner and collaborator, Dr. Joshua Sherman, who produced the album, we tweaked it a little bit. He gave me some outside perspective. He's actually a doctor. So we're both, you know, producer, musician, addict, and doctor. So he played an actually invaluable role in the whole process, kind of giving me an outside perspective. And he's also done like some Broadway workshops in songwriting. So he helped to tweak the poem, but I really wanted to make a hook that tied it all together. And, you know, it's an interesting line, you know, tell the story of your life like writing on a postcard. But to me, what that means is like, there's always an image, but then there's like the writing that goes with it in a personal story. And when someone sends a postcard, it's a beautiful image, but what they're writing is always separate from the image. And it's like their interpretation of it. So I wanted to give the image of, you know, the track marks and the scars on my arms, but also the story behind them. And, you know, I got this tattoo right here. And it's basically the outline of my worst scar from addiction. But be it self-harm or be it not even a scar on the skin, like you mentioned, we all got our scars, whether they're literal or metaphorical. And I had, you know, had this experience where I was a busboy for my first job after I got sober. And, you know, really just kind of reacquainting myself with the physical world, trying to deal with it on terms of, you know, non-chemical compulsion one day at a time. And I was wearing long sleeves, and I'm from DC, if you can't tell from my, like, you know, non-upstate Vermont accent. And in DC, it gets hot as hell in the summer. And it was September because summer goes to October in DC. It was like 100 degrees, full humidity. It's like you're walking through a swamp. And I didn't want people to see my arms. So I had these like button down sleeves all the way up. But then, you know, my hands start sweating. I'm not experienced in the service industry. I start dropping these ceramic plates. Everyone's like looking at me with this disgust and anger, including the coworkers, everyone like, you know, standing there. They don't get it. So I'm like, screw it. I'm going to like roll my sleeves up. And sure enough, I go inside to grab a baguette because it's a French restaurant. And within like 2 seconds, a server doesn't miss a beat because they're mad perceptive. And they're like, hey, man, what's up with those scars? And I froze because I didn't know what to do at that moment. Like I had never been confronted with anyone outside recovery fellowships or like treatment centers or my family and non-judgmental friends asking me. And like, you know, I hadn't been 100% open about my struggle with the people who worked there, but I had a decision to make at that moment, which is, do I try to like use my manipulative addict powers to like con these people and come up with a lie to like justify what they are, say it's surgery or something? Or do I tell them the truth and hope that they'll accept me? And I decided to tell the truth, and I didn't do it for some like virtual higher ground type deal. Like I'm not going to say I did it because like I was like on a moral stance or anything. I honestly did it because I knew that it was going to be more work for me to lie than it is to tell the truth. And it was just going to be, because in my addiction, I had to just lie so much, intricate webs of lies. And I was just so exhausted and tired of lying that I was like, nah, I'm a recovering addict and I don't use anymore. But these scars are reminders to me of where I've been. And ever since that moment, that's kind of served as like a metaphor for the fact that if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, at least for me, like where I'm coming from, I don't want to speak for nobody else. But for me, if I allow myself to like bear my scars of all types, and I'm not afraid of the consequences, I find that although some people are judgmental and they got stigma, and everybody's got stigma or something, and that's a form of trauma in itself. But I found that people are usually very accepting. And not only that, but if I'm open about my stuff, they become open about theirs and they become willing to share because they see my vulnerability and see the strength that comes with it from that vulnerability. And it allows me to grow closer with people. So that's what the song was inspired by. And I'm glad you vibe with it, man, because that's one of my favorite cuts on the album.
Yeah, dude, it's very powerful, man. Very powerful stuff. I was like, wow, heavy stuff. We're big music. I'm a musician stuff. We're both musicians. So the music part of it has always been an obsession anyway. And I'm curious to know, when you were younger and coming from the lineage that you came from, was there a shadow that was cast over you? Because if I read this correctly, were you a like child prodigy? Is that kind of or is that sort of a misnomer of things?
What kind of person is gonna sit, even if you're like Liberace, and say that you're a child prodigy? I mean, right. That's the ultimate ego inflation. I can't claim to be a prodigy. I won some contests. You know, I was playing like full grade classical pieces when I was 12, and I was winning like juvenile contests. I never got Van Cliburn level, largely because of my addiction. You know, I had every opportunity, but I decided to pursue hip hop when I was 14, 15 more vigorously than I did piano, but I still won contests. I still got into conservatory. I still played performance level pieces, Chopin etudes, Beethoven sonatas, you know, and it definitely was, I don't want to say a looming shadow, because my family never really pressured me that much, but really the name association provided its own type of pressure. My parents were very nurturing and loving people. You know, my dad was, you know, a stoic Harvard hippie who had his own like baggage. He wasn't an addict, but he to this day, through my recovery, it's allowed me to connect with him on a deeper level and kind of rekindle our friendship in addition to our father-son connection. And when he was up in Vermont giving me the house I'm sitting in now, which he built, he said, "I'm so proud of your willpower to be able to stay clean." And I said, "Dad, it had nothing to do with willpower. It had to do with surrender and acceptance." He's like, "You know, I can never get that. I'm 100% willpower. I am 100% mental power." And I looked at him and I asked him, "Why don't you allow yourself to connect with yourself?" And it was kind of this moment where, like, you know, your kid is asking you this, and he's this like super stoic and hard body guy. He's like, "I can't go there." He's like, I can't detach. And it was kind of this bittersweet moment, because I was able to like look at this man who I had always wanted to impress. I guess that's the point here. I've always wanted to impress my parents. And it's not because they said, "You have to do this, you have to do that." There wasn't any expectation like a family of lawyers or doctors or like experienced tradesmen or even musicians would already have, because, you know, like, there's a legacy of words in music in my family. You know, you got Irving Berlin, but my grandmother, grandfather on both sides are just experienced journalists. My grandmother went to Juilliard and published an autobiography. My grandfather was a syndicated columnist for you know, the New York Post before it got acquired by Murdoch, when it was more of like a journalistic empire. No shade, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
So I come from that lineage for sure, but there was never any expectation to specifically do anything. They just needed me to be good at whatever it is that I did. And so I would play piano, and at first I wasn't that good until, you know, I learned how to like kind of interpret it in a system of numbers. And we can get more into that later, but it played into my Asperger's autism spectrum thing. I numbered my fingers, and it was like unlocking a key, because it was easier to view it in 5 fingers instead of 12 keys, like 7 white, 5 black keys, and then the scales and the intervals. And that all came later, but my teacher was very conducive to like my neurotype and understanding how to like wrap that around my numbers obsession, my pattern obsession with Asperger's. But yeah, man, I mean, I grew up with Irving Berlin photos on my wall and like Oscar statuettes in my grandmother's apartment. But more than any of that, I just wanted to prove that I myself was worthy. And people would say, "Oh, you got such big shoes to fill." And it wasn't even like, I knew I wasn't going to be Irving Berlin. I mean, you can't live up to that. That's 5,000 songs, Oscar winning songs, movie scoring songs, Bing Crosby tap dancing songs. That ain't me. But what's interesting is that, you know, even though the classical piano thing, because of course, even though he's not a classical pianist, Irving Berlin writes a lot of beautiful piano songs. What I found I more closely followed his trajectory was actually the hip hop stuff, because if you really kind of deconstruct where Berlin was coming from, he was kind of a cultural mesher. He went up to Tin Pan Alley in the Bronx in the early 19-teens, and he started writing ragtime. His first songs weren't in like conventional pop and like early standards of like the 19-teens and the 20s. They were ragtime, and ragtime was kind of like the early jazz. And I don't want to say hip hop, but it was swing. It was syncopated. It was countercultural. I mean, it was Harlem Renaissance. And, you know, if you really want to deconstruct it even further, the second Harlem Renaissance and the second Bronx Renaissance was hip hop.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was. And so people think that hip hop is out of Irving Berlin's wheelhouse, but I like to think he would have got a kick out of it, man, because he was going out of his comfort zone, little Jewish kid from the Lower East Side going up to the Bronx to be part of that African-American musical culture and revolution and incorporating it into his work and meshing it with his Russian folk songs and those modes and that music. And so when I got exposed to hip hop and the hip hop culture of DC, I mean, you know, a lot of people use the word cultural appropriation, and I have my own thoughts on that. I want to always be respectful and deferential of the original form of hip hop. But I will say that allowing myself to like fully embrace and understand the culture of DC and like be part of that hip hop scene, it served as a kind of therapy for not just, you know, my trauma, I don't want to say trauma, but the pressure I felt growing up, but it allowed me to find my own identity. And it allowed me to kind of separate from that Irving Berlin pressure and familial pressure and really be like, nah, this is me. And a way that classical piano didn't ever do. And it was amazing to be able to meld those two musical sides of myself together with this album, because it was kind of like a final closure where all that pressure I experienced and then my love for hip hop and the liberating thing all coalesced and came back together. So it was a beautiful watershed moment where I was able to reconcile those two differences. And like I say, man, I think Irving would get a kick out of it because he was always about mixing music together.
Yeah, man, I can tell that just by the way you talk about your passion for hip hop and just and what your next footing in history is and your familial history, because you're obviously adding to it. But I really want to touch on the mental health part of it. And I'm not very familiar with Asperger's. I've heard of it. I don't know exactly what it is. And I'm really interested to know how that is played into how that played into your addiction and when did the addiction start? Did you just start, you know, was it starting to smoke weed and then things escalated, or was it alcohol? There's obviously an entrance in there somewhere. And obviously in hip hop culture, we know what hip hop, I mean, you know, what commercial hip hop culture is. It's, you know, 40s and stuff. And I'm not trying to minimize it at all, but we know that popular music wise, that's what we hear all the time. So I was just I'm curious to know, was that your introduction, or did you start dabbling earlier? Like, how does this all coalesce together?
So let's deconstruct it and get to the mental health piece and the chemical thing, because they are completely intertwined. And I actually addressed it on the first song of Clean, Performer, which I basically just tried to encapsulate with my rant about my family and, you know, the different pressures and how hip hop allowed me to escape. And the first line of Performer is, I'm a performer and the world is a stage. Every conversation I have and every word that I say is pre-rehearsed inside my mind while I purposefully try to get approval from outside in an absurd little game. And what that means is I'm a patterns guy, and Asperger's takes different like tacks in different people. It expresses itself in different ways. I mean, there are people with autism who literally can't communicate verbally, but they can build incredible structures. Like a good way to talk about it is, if your kid can't talk by the time they're 3, but they can take Playmobil or Legos and build incredible structures or draw at the level of like a 15-year-old art student at a specialized high school, they might have a little bit of a leaning towards Asperger's or, you know, autism, whether it's functional or not. And the way it manifested for me is I have never felt comfortable looking people in the eye. And people think that, you know, it's because I'm antisocial, and you can call it that. But what it really is that when I look people in the eye, I get an overwhelming gaze into their, I don't want to say soul, although I do have a spiritual component of my life, but I get an uncomfortable dose of human emotion. And it is so off-putting to me. It is so unnatural to me that it literally like causes shock waves of pain and tension to like move through my skull and send shivers down my spine. Because in my very essence, I'm afraid that I don't understand people. Like, I look in people's eyes, it's so disarming. So forgive me for saying this, but even while we're doing this Zoom, I'm looking at my own reflection. And it's because I don't want to get thrown off. It has nothing to do with you. You guys are cool. It's got nothing to do with you guys specifically making me uncomfortable. It's that whenever I peer into another person, I am so afraid that they're not going to see me, that I'm going to make a mistake, that I don't get who they are. that I just go into my own world. And if you look, I don't really know Latin that much, but I've been told that, like, you know, the same way automaton, automatic is like kind of self-sufficient, self-contained, moving on its own. Autism has kind of the same root. It's self-contained. You're in your own bubble. You're not looking at other people. You're incapable of connecting with people. And I always tell people I'm a pretty sympathetic individual, at least I try to be, but I am not empathetic naturally at all. If I see someone who's crying, I approach them from my own understanding. I find it very hard to connect with people. I find it very hard to break myself down and put myself in other people's experiences. I have to do it all mentally. None of it's natural. If a normal person walks into a room and they see like a social situation, they're like, oh, this is how I go. And it's just kind of natural. And everybody has anxiety. Everybody's got their own trepidations, but I always used to be so jealous of kids growing up who could just weave their way in, know the exact right way to approach stuff, know the exact right tone. But when I got tired of like only having one or two friends and like, you know, being the outcast and like not getting invited to the pool parties, whatever you want to talk about, I developed a system. The same way I developed a system with the piano. And that was I analyzed speech patterns, slang patterns, like a robot, like an AI algorithm with a face. And I developed my own system for coping with social stuff. And so whenever I go into a new social scene, you can peep it. I sit on the side, I don't say a word, and I systematically study down from the facial expressions to the body language, to the tone of the voice, to the slang they use, to how formal, informal it is. I always take that time. And people are like, why, damn, why is he so socially reserved? It's because I'm peeping it out. And I'm not judging anyone like in a malicious way, but I am judging. I'm looking at people from an objective lens in my context and previous understanding. And it's basically flipping the whole Asperger's piece and using it to my advantage, because I decided if I'm going to have this, if I'm going to be limited by this, I might as well draw on the hypersensitive, hyperacute powers of observation that are pinning me down and making me trapped within myself to better understand. So I started using that to connect with people socially, but I found that even though I did that, there was still this burgeoning tide of conscious emotion that I couldn't shut off. And the closest thing I got to shutting it off was like Pokemon cards, video games, forms of obsession, forms of material obsession, and things that would allow me to detach, because Pokemon cards is a fantasy world separate from me. I don't have to think about me. Video games is a fantasy world. I don't have to think about me. And the first endorphin rush I ever got actually didn't come from a bottle or a bag. It came from skateboarding. And that was my first, form of endorphin, endogenous morphine release, was dropping it in a skate park and doing all that stuff. And I never got that good, but I loved it, man. I was never good at any sports, wasn't a ball sports guy because I don't got that team mentality. But I started skateboarding, and up until that was like 12, 13 when I got serious about that. But then the big skate park in my town closed, and I didn't really have any like outlet. I had the piano, but it wasn't, that was my discipline. It wasn't my passion. And I had never had a drink before with the aim of changing consciousness. I'd had
that's the big thing right there, is the changing of the consciousness. It's that chemical rush of being able to change and shut off your mind.
Yeah. And I had a sip of like champagne ceremonially. I had snuck a taste of my parents' drinks, known to them and unknown to them, just kind of like them trying to give me a taste for it. They didn't know I was an alcoholic. They're very cosmopolitan, European, classy at the time, but I didn't know what it did. And I didn't have any expectation doing it that it would change. But, over the course of the dinner parties, I started to notice a pattern. I was like, hey, this is doing this to me. And I like the way that feels. And, but it was only just a couple sips here and there. And then I was about 13. And I went over to my friend's house, and he was like, hey, want a drink? I got like a 6-pack of beer that my parents don't know is missing. And it was cobwebbed, and it was lukewarm. It was out of a refrigerator in this dark and musty corner of his basement. And, I took that dark and musty sixer and I split it with my friend. And I was really stressed at the time. I was like 7th or 8th grade. I was just starting to like grow and develop, just starting to, become attracted to girls and want to do that. I had no idea how to connect with women. I had no idea how to connect with my peers and grow socially. And at that critical moment, when the skate park had closed, when I was dealing with the beginning of my, performance piano deal, and I was kind of like empty shell of a forming adolescent, it was just this instant snap. And all of my Asperger's anxiety, all of my sensory overload was just equally, perfectly flatline medicated. And I was like, this is it. This is what I have been searching for my entire life. Now I understand why adults drink. Maybe everyone is like me. Maybe they don't all have Asperger's, but maybe everyone feels the same way that I do. And it was kind of like the alcohol served as a magic bridge to connecting with people. I didn't feel scared when I looked people in the eye. I didn't feel like I was like on the verge of a nervous breakdown from sensory overload. And I chased that feeling for, 10 years. And at first it was mad suburban. I would drink too much and I would miss a track meet. I would get an F on a test. I would get a bad score on a piano judging. I would smell like cigarettes and weed, hanging out with my piano teacher, who was also a church organist. And he'd give me a sideways glance and tell me, he actually, to his credit, he actually says like, no, I don't like any of this smoking, but if you're going to smoke before our lessons, make sure you smoke the exact amount at the same time when you're in this exact same amount before you do a judging, because your hands are going to be shaky in the same way. He was very pragmatic about it, but he didn't like it. And he saw it as like a necessary evil. But as it escalated, I kind of justified the worsening of the consequences by the fact that I was becoming more and more comfortable with myself. And the comfort I felt mentally, the fact that I wasn't scared to look people in the eye anymore, the fact that I was able to go out and do social forays and connect with all these different circles of people, it justified it to me. And all of the peers that I had were drinking and using more than me, and I used that to justify it too. And before, I could go on this spiel forever, but the one thing I do want to touch on is, you said, like, hip hop, the mainstream culture, hip hop is all about, chemical escapism. And I totally agree with you in a lot of ways. And, the culture does embrace that. But what I will say about hip hop is that hip hop, regardless of whether it's new cats like, Roddy Ricch, Young Thug, Gunna talking about promethazine coating, cop syrup and oxys, Gucci Mane before that, Future, Lil Wayne, like Birdman, all that. Or it's like old school cats, talking about selling weed on the corners of New York, like Rakim and Nas, and like sipping 40s, like in that old school sense. Hip hop's a product of its environment. And a lot of these people who people are saying, oh, they're just arbiters of this like drug-induced swag, they're turning our kids on to drugs. I choose not to see it that way. And the reason I choose not to see it that way and see it as destructive is a lot of these people, especially the people who have gang ties and checkered criminal pasts, they got trauma. And they're medicating their trauma too. And a lot of these people who are sensitive musicians and poets, even though they got face tats and gang affiliations, they're hypersensitive people too. And I could go on a long diatribe about the divide between white and African American and BIPOC, like mental health care in the nation. But it's incredible to me that when a white artist or someone talks about their mental health struggles, they get celebrated. But when, a hip hop artist like from the streets who's got a face tattoo and, like a gold chain tries to get vulnerable and talk about their addiction, they're seen as a monster for it. So I just wanted to put that out there and say, I know that's not like where you're coming at it from, but I hear you're very like deferential and respectful. I'm not saying you came into that way at all, but I just wanted to make sure that, because I run a sobriety hip hop show and I'm like a white rapper, and I just want to make sure that I'm not dissing people who are making drug centric music at all. I made it for years in my active addiction, but what I will say is that drug centric hip hop music is also always a symptom of a greater underlying mental health issue that hasn't been addressed. Because when I was making my drug-based hip-hop, it was because I wanted to glorify the one thing that allowed me to escape from my mental pain.
Yeah, and that's not where I was getting at with the culture reference, man.
Oh no, that's why I wanted to say that. Just like, yeah, I know that's
no, because it's taken me a long time to, I'm 49 years old, and to me, what hip hop is to you was what like the 80s hard rock scene was to me. And when you look at bands like Motley Crue and all those bands that you glorify, they did all these things too, and it just happened to be in that form of music. So and I understand there's a way, the culture of it. I understand that everybody has trauma and all that stuff, and I'm interested to see what Timmy has to say on this.
Well, I was just going to say that the real gateway drug is trauma, that's the beginning of that. Everybody's got trauma. Everybody's got, anxiety to some level. Everyone's got depression to some degree. It's just a matter of kind of accepting it and understanding it. But I kind of wanted, I love the story so far, Benjamin. I actually relate a lot. I've been told that I myself is Aspie as well, just because I'm a big sensory guy, huge sensory guy. For years, I could never really distinguish it, and I was talking to my therapist about being like overly anxious when I get out of the shower and I'm in the bathroom. She was trying to go through things, and I said, well, there's a fan that automatically comes on when I turn the light on, and it's that, it's not extremely loud, but it's loud enough. And for some reason, when that fan is on, I can feel, to this day, now I can pay attention to it, and I can feel my body just tense up because of that noise of the fan. So
Yeah.
I can relate to you on that. I do want to ask you, go back to when you were in the restaurant and you first were approached about your scars. I'm just curious on how that other person handled it, and then kind of how you handled it, on top of what they did.
They were supportive. I could kind of tell that they had had some exposure to maybe a loved one or like a friend who had suffered from addiction, and most people have.
Right.
I mean, with the alcoholism and the opioid epidemic, everybody's touched in some way. And whether it's an acquaintance or someone they know, like a church or like from their local group or something, like everybody's got someone. And a lot of people have someone in their family or a close loved one, especially in heavily impacted states like where I'm at, and also the upstate region. I mean, you can't drive through upstate without seeing like a poster. Like I saw a huge billboard in Washington County near like Cambridge, like the year I moved up, which was like, driving under the influence of opioids is like drunk driving. Like, we will prosecute that. You can't do that. And I was like, that's heavy. It's everywhere and you can't stop it. But by saying that, what I mean is I made the decision of being honest with people about my addiction. And that's what my platform is all about. And before I had a radio show, before I really got back to making music, because I never really stopped. But I took a break because I wanted to live my life and I wanted to get clean and I wanted to like deal with my underlying mental health issues, which was a 2.5-year journey in itself. And what that moment really did when that person accepted me, and they didn't have any motivation to like be accepting and nurturing. They were just being them. And because my family has motivation, they want to keep me alive. My treatment circle and my like recovery fellowship has motivation. They want to keep me coming back and keep me in the program because that's keeping their recovery going. But this person didn't have any of that. They weren't in recovery, but just their compassion and their understanding allowed me to get outside of myself and feel comfortable taking more chances. And at the time I was a busboy who was living with his mom. And, I started thinking maybe there is a chance that even though I have a history of addiction, that I am going to be capable of taking risks, applying for better jobs and moving forward. So it was at the same organization, but, it wasn't like, like a casual restaurant I was working at. It was like a very like expensive, refined, like French suburban bistro. And normally you have to have like 3 years of service experience before you ever like become a server there. And, I was actually, one of the first busboys that they made into a waiter. And the reason is that I literally memorized the entire menu, word for word. And it's not just like the menu, like on the cart you get, like when you sit down at the table, but like the chef descriptions. I could tell them all 34 ingredients in the pate and how it's made and like stuff like that. And that's, again, the Asperger's using it to my advantage. I had to reframe my anxiety and my obsession and use it to my advantage. And they said, wow, you like really want this job? And I said, yeah, I really want this job. And again, that's the addiction and the recovery to my advantage because I'm hungry. I want to get my life back. I want to move forward. And I don't care because I dropped out of college, but I wanted to get my life back. I wanted to pay for my own apartment. I wanted to have the resources to navigate life and move forward in my recovery. And that moment where someone was accepting of me made me think that even though I had been through all that stuff, even though I had been through this horrible addiction, burnt bridges with my family, completely detached from reality. Like it got so bad that I was like, lancing abscesses with dirty needles and smoking like half-smoked cigarettes off of the street. It got bad. But the worst consequence of all that was that I didn't know who I was anymore. Like, I was so far gone from my own understanding of myself, and I had medicated myself so long that the anxiety came back 10 times worse than it ever did, because I had been like trying to shove it down with heroin and cocaine for so long that I didn't know it was possible to live an unmedicated life. I didn't know it was possible to live life on life's terms. And so every single time that I showed someone my scars, metaphorical or literal, and they allowed me to move forward, like my boss, like when I became a waiter, and then crazily enough in recovery became a bartender because it paid better. And he asked me, he's like, you've been telling people around here that you're a recovering addict. You're going to be in charge of a cash drawer. You're going to be in charge of, like, you know, doing all this stuff, like at the front of the restaurant. You can't crack up. You can't lash out. You can't do any of this. Like, these are clients that spend like upwards of $50,000 here a year. Like, you can't do that. And I just looked at him and said, well, then I guess you got to decide whether or not you're willing to give me a chance. And then he shared about his friend who would struggle with addiction. And again, my openness and my willingness to break myself down resulted in vulnerability, and it resulted in people giving me a chance. And yeah, I'm still apprehensive to tell anybody that I have scars. I'm still apprehensive to tell anybody that I'm not perfect, that I struggle with Asperger's, that I struggle with addiction. But again, every single time that I became willing, even if people were a little bit apprehensive themselves, and even if they had their own stigma, like my boss didn't want to put me in that position, but by continuing to be honest, by continuing to be open about my mental health struggles, I think he thought, well, at least this person's being forward with it. Because the thing I say to employers who are giving addicts chances is, yeah, they got a history of addiction. There's probably some co-occurring mental health issues there. But every single other person who doesn't have addiction, not only you don't know what baggage they're coming with, you don't know what they've been through, but they're probably not actively working on their mental health issues in the same way. And of course, that's a gross generalization, but the cool thing about recovery is that it allows you not just to confront your chemical compulsion, but the underlying issues in a completely head-on and accountable way. So even though I did struggle with heroin addiction for years, the fact that I'm in recovery, and like you say, there are a bunch of types of recovery. It's not just sobriety fellowships. There's recovery from mental health. There's recovery from trauma, and I touch on that on my show. But I was working on that too. And I think that he came to see through my trajectory that it was possible for an addict to work in that capacity. And I want to give a shout out to every single employer who's willing to work with people who struggle with addiction issues, people who struggle with trauma, because by him giving me that chance, I was able to move forward. And I don't think employers that give addicts a chance get shouted out nearly enough in a positive way. It needs to happen. And I'm so grateful that I was able to show people my scars and they were able to be open to it and give me that chance.
What do you, I'm from what I'm hearing, you have tremendous insight. You know, what do you, is there anything in particular that you can attribute to that?
In terms of what, like rapid fire verbal type thing, or
no, just with your own self, you're able to look within and kind of put pieces together and understand it though at the same time, and then through the healing process, you can kind of, I guess, fix it and grow.
Well, what's interesting about that is that when I first went to treatment, there was this guy. It was kind of like this spiritual program in Northern Maryland. And there's this kind of thing where they prompt you to like have a spiritual experience. They don't say it like that, but you meet with like a spiritual advisor and all that stuff. And I was so guarded. I was not ready to get sober. It was in 2012, 4 years before I got sober this time around. And I was using all of my cognitive capacity to shield myself and to make it so that this incredibly intelligent and spiritually aware person could not permeate my shell and could not sway me off of my path. And he kind of studied me and he's like, it's often been said that the most quick thinking people who are always in their heads are going to have the hardest time in recovery. And you can think very fast, but the question is, are you going to use your fast thinking to your benefit or to your detriment? And he kind of gave up on reaching me at that point because he realized that I was using my power of thought to justify my addiction, and I was. And I guess in regards to insight, instead of trying to use my cognitive capacity to manipulate, and go around the backs of people that I love to get another dollar for another high, and it's hard to live a life as an addict. It's a lot of brain power. It's a lot of walking. It's a lot of talking. It's a lot of fast and smooth talking. The best addicts are, at their essence, manipulators. And so I was always in my head back then. I was always insightful then, but I directed it to the means of trying to get another high, trying to escape from my mental pain and anguish. And now that that's not part of my narrative, and at least not anymore, I'm able to take the same energy that I used during my addiction to con, lie, steal, manipulate, do what I had to do to get through the day, to do what I have to do to get through the day in a different way. And if I don't reflect that same energy back within myself and peep out what's going on, I'm going to lash out. I'm going to be resentful. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be miserable. I'm going to be discontent. I'm just going to be a seething ball of anger and resentment, and just like a rice cooker crock pot ready to just blow up and like expand and froth and foam on everybody else. And I don't want to be that. And I always have that capacity. I always have that capacity to try to think the whole world's against me. And I have my days, even though I got, recovery column, recovery show, recovery album, this and that. I work as a recovery advocate. I'm talking with people in the medical field and all that. There are days when I know that I'm not ready to do any of that. And I either have to grin and bear it and wear a smile, or I just have to like shut myself off, even from my girlfriend and my dog, and take like half an hour and just be like, this is me time, because my sensory overload cannot be medicated. I mean, and that's okay. But I guess the insight comes from necessity, because if I don't see what's really going on, then how is anybody else supposed to understand me? And I'm bad at trying to get other people to understand me. I'm bad at connecting with people. So again, it's taking my autistic tendency of being within myself and using it to my advantage, because I said before that it's hard for me to feel empathy with other people. But the one thing that's super dope about recovery and the recovery community is that even though I'm so different from all these other people, we have a ground line, baseline similarity. And that is so comforting to me as someone with my condition, because I know that I have something in common with people. And I know that every single moment I spend analyzing myself, which I would do anyway. That's just the way my mind works. I'm always second guessing myself, always judging myself. But in the context of recovery and mental health and sobriety sense, I'm able to use that over analysis and not have it lead to paralysis, have it lead to understanding other people. Because if I'm able to understand the dynamics of my own behavior, and I'm able to really confront that, I can look at other people and understand them better. So now I'm using the very same thing that used to trap me within myself and not understand people because of my autism spectrum deficiencies. I'm not going to say deficiencies, just difference. It's neurotypical. It's not whatever normal is. Whatever normal is.
Yeah.
I'm able to use that, and I'm able to connect with people by understanding myself and use my experiences as equivalents and analogies to understand their stories. Because they always say in my sobriety fellowship, it's always better to identify with other people than it is to not identify with them. And so by analyzing my behavior and everything I've been through, I can connect with people. And I find that I can connect with people because I understand what they're going through on my own terms.
That's awesome. That's actually the perfect segue into the next thing that I wanted to ask you, which is about this pattern making, because you had talked about patterns. So I thought that this was the perfect way to get into this, because it sounds like this has been, once you figured out the key, that this has been the way you've assimilated yourself into every situation and been able to keep your sobriety and to keep yourself moving in a positive direction. If you're willing to describe, or whatever it is, however you want to talk about it, can you talk about this pattern making and how you came up with this?
Yeah. So I'm going to sum it up in 2 words and then expand from there. Everything is connected.
I agree.
Every sense is connected. When I hear a sound, it's a waveform. Even when you go to a studio, it's a waveform. And that's a visual equivalent of a sonic pattern. So in that very sense, when you have an MRI or whatever those like EKG scans are, those not MRI, that's a brain image, but brainwave patterns. That's not even a quantifiable thing. I mean, maybe there are electrical impulses, but that's a visual wave. And so in its essence, everything is a synesthetic pattern that's expanding around us. You know, the sound waves of the birds chirping outside, the light waves from the blades of grass, they're all patterns. But then the question is, how do those patterns manifest in our everyday lives? And so for me, I love music because it's a mathematical pattern that crosses an emotional boundary. I love art because even though art
I love the way you describe that, man. Sorry to cut you off.
No, of course.
Describe that, man. That was awesome.
Thank you. I mean, it's the reality I choose to live in. And I always tell people they're like, I'm not synesthetic, because there are degrees of synesthesia awareness, synesthesia blending of the senses. And I say, I'll prove to you that you are. And they say, how? And I say, all right, I want you to think about the Lord of the Rings. And then I want you to think about like a beach scene, like the battle scene from the towers where it's raining with all like the mystical angry creatures in Lord of the Rings, the second movie. Have you seen that? And they're like, yeah. And or Star Wars, like the Imperial troops marching in Star Wars. I see you got the Yoda creature there from Mandalorian. That's awesome. Shout out Baby Yoda. That's what's up. But so you got the angry Imperial scene, like a battle scene, dark. And then you got like a happy beach scene. You got a black metal Slayer song, and you got a Katy Perry California Girls song. Which song goes with which vision? And they're always like, well, of course the black metal song goes with the image of like the Lord of the Rings Mordor scene. Of course that California Girls song goes with the beach scene. I say, but why is that of course? Why is that? Because you at an inherent level make the connection between a pattern of a certain piece of music going with a certain visual. So that means even if you don't sense it, your senses are connected. And the way that manifests, that synesthetic connection manifests with me, is that when I hear a piece, it's an image. And it's not just like, you know, like a scene or like a painting. It's a literal like jigsaw puzzle line in my head. And it's not like a waveform. It's like different chords, if you add a note or take it away, hit my mind in a certain way. And I've become knowledgeable about it, at least on my, not in terms of how it impacts other people. I'm not a psychologist. I don't study this professionally, but in my own mind, I have certain chords that I play. And I'm like, that fits with this. And so when I did the pattern thing when I was growing up, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of a scale. Like, for example, when you do a scale and it's C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C for a C major scale, I wouldn't think that. I would think 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's what my fingers would play. And that was my way of understanding a greater pattern than myself and, you know, using it into my digital, in the sense of digits, not like technical, but human machine. Because as a pianist, I am one biological machine meeting with another non-biological mechanical machine. And it's not electric, but it's a complex thing. You hit a key and a lever, like, you know, gets a hammer to hit on a string, and it's just like driving a car. And when you're doing that, you have to understand that there are limitations both to your own human instrument and that instrument there. And so you have to be aware of the limitations, you have to be aware of the math, and you have to be aware of the pattern. And so once I understood the pattern of numbering my fingers, I became aware of the patterns of keys, like different modes and different like minor and major stuff. And I mapped them out in my head on my own cognizance and my own way of dealing with it. And it was the same thing as dealing with, like, you know, a social environment. And everybody does this. At least my opinion is everybody does this. Everybody maps out social scenes in their head. And another equivalent is you're going to your mother-in-law's house. You have to come up with a system for how to deal with those awkward situations. And people don't think it's a pattern, but you're basing it off of past experiences. You're using it, incorporating it into your worldview, and you're like, how do I respond to this situation? But most people do it unconsciously. And I have had to do it consciously for my entire life. And so I've become very acutely aware of the different dynamics of patterns. And in music, it manifests in, if I hear a flow pattern from a rapper I like, if I hear a Chopin piece that I like that, like, you know, does certain, like, you know, obscure intervals in a beautiful way, I'm able to see it in my head and be like, not just I like that, but that's why I like that. I like that because that's the basic 4/4 pattern in the rap. Then it gets syncopated with triplets, and I really like the way that line looks in my head. So I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna like switch it and do it in my own way. I really like that Chopin pattern because that augmented fifth leading into that sixth is so beautiful, and I'm able to see it and like map it out with my fingers and all that. So I guess the basic thing is my natural propensity for patterns comes from a natural impulse to understand the world through my own lens and my own understanding, the same way I did for my social understanding. But what I would say is everybody sees the world through patterns. It's just a process of becoming conscious of those patterns and understanding how you can become part of the greater pattern, because we're all part of the greater pattern.
Wow, that's awesome, man.
Thank you.
Now, you talk about the greater pattern. When did you discover the greater pattern? Like, when did you discover the language to say the greater pattern? Was this something that's just been recent, or was this like, because obviously you've been doing the pattern thing your whole entire life. So was there a time when the light switched on, so to speak, maybe during your recovery when you were clear enough to think about the patterns? Or was this something that you were like, was this a tool that maybe had been accessed through your therapy and through your recovery and stuff? Or was this like kind of come to where you came up with this idea of the pattern?
I can't take credit for the phrase "the great pattern." That's my uncle, and he's this environmental justice guy, and he's very California, very kombucha, very zen, and very Whole Foods, whatever you want to call it. And he's a Christian Buddhist, and he's a more than any specific, that's a funny word, more specific manifestation of spirituality. He's just very in tune with himself. And he's not as anxious as I am. He's never had a problem with chemicals. He can have half a glass of wine. Imagine that. He can take it or leave it. But he's very in tune with that stuff. And he's got his own understanding of the pattern. And he said when I was, I think, 9 or 10 years old, he's like, "Ben, I can't wait to see the way you manifest yourself in the great pattern." And I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought it was just some new age hippie stuff that him and my dad were on as environmental journalists. But as I became older and I played piano more, and I, not to put too fine a point on it, but addiction is a pattern. It's just a destructive pattern. And I began to see that the different patterns that I chose to involve myself in were either building or destroying. There's a great line from one of my favorite rap songs of all time. It's called Exhibit C by Jay Electronica. And it's, "You either build or destroy where you come from." And I started seeing that. And I started seeing how my different patterns of behavior, patterns of thought, patterns of self-expression, patterns of the way I treated other people were kind of coming back around. And if I chose to live in a certain way, it was reflected in how the universal pattern like expressed itself. And you can call it karma, you can call it judgment from a higher power, whatever sits the best with you. I got my own, spiritual understanding and spiritual ritual. But yeah, therapy helped. But what therapy really helped me do is kind of get out of my own head. It allowed me to escape the more, I don't want to say malevolent, but more limiting aspects of my pattern. Because when I get locked into a pattern, it's really a way of understanding the world. And sometimes I get so locked in, like Jim Carrey in The Number 23, to like just so obsessed with my understanding that it takes me away from openness. And so a therapist is really, I don't mean to downplay it, but to me, it's really nothing more than an informed and compassionate outside perspective that says, maybe you're seeing the pattern wrong and you need to humble yourself down. And that's what the people from my recovery fellowship are. That's what my family, my friends, my coworkers are. I don't have a perfect vision of the pattern. In my more arrogant days, I might think I do, but I'm only one tiny slice of the human experience, man. Like, I got my understanding, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. I mean, 100 years ago, we didn't even have vaccines. We didn't even have computers. We didn't even have any understanding that, like, binary sequences could create like 3D generated models. That was like science fiction. I mean, even 50 years ago with like 2001: A Space Odyssey, that HAL computer looks like something that's so primitive compared to where we're at today. And I have a tiny glimpse of the pattern, and I'm kidding myself if I think I know anything more than that. This pattern is so vast and huge. But what I will say is, therapy and recovery have allowed me to understand not just what I know, but what I don't know. And they've given me a chance to learn how to listen. I'm not good at, I'm a talker, as you can tell. Once I get started, I don't stop, but they've given me the chance to understand that the only way I can increase my knowledge of the great pattern is by understanding what I don't know as well as what I do.
I love how you put that, because one thing that I've learned from doing this podcast for the last 2 years is that the more I learn, the less I know. And I can relate in so many ways to all the things you're saying, and I don't want to take up all your day. And we always finish up the podcast with 3 questions. Two serious, one not so serious, but serious to me anyway. So I'm going to let Tim ask the first question, man.
Do you have a favorite or a least favorite word?
I like the word loquacious.
Okay.
Loquacious, it's just got a cool shape. It's like very, very soft, very, very kind of curvy. And
what's the definition? What is the definition?
Easy with the tongue, gifted with words, very like someone who's loose tongued and kind of effortless. Like if someone's tipsy at a party, or just a preacher at a sermon and the words are just coming out of them with effortless ease, they're loquacious, a gifted conversationalist. Okay. And I don't have a least favorite word. I like words of all kinds, because even if words like make me uncomfortable or like make me not feel good, that's cool. Like that, I'll just be like, kind of put it in that section. That's that word that goes over there.
Nice.
That's awesome, man. Love it. So my favorite question for myself is just because I love animals, and animals play such a big part in our lives. So cat, dog, or other, or all.
I like cats and dogs. And sometimes in my I have a dog, so I guess I'm a dog person. I don't have a cat, but I've had a lot of girlfriends who have cats, friends who have cats, and I love them. I identify with them. They're kind of aloof and mystical, and dogs are more kind of like open and connected. Oh my God, like gotta connect with you right now. So that's kind of more like me. I'm always starved for connection and approval and stuff. So I guess I'm a dog person. But if I had to come up with a favorite animal, man, just because they're so cool, axolotl. You know what an axolotl is?
No, I do not.
It's an aqueous Mexican sea salamander.
Oh my gosh.
It literally looks like a cartoon. It's got these like little, like, I don't want to say antlers, but like things going off the side of its head. And it looks like the character Kirby from Nintendo games. It's like little and pink and like cartoonish. And I just kind of Google like funny animals sometimes, and I came across this one. It's AXOLOTL. It's like Aztec named. It is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm continually amazed by the ways that the pattern expresses itself in animals, and it's a beautiful thing, man. The axolotl is out there, but I love it.
Wow, I'm gonna have to look that one up for the show notes just so I can get the spelling right. That needs a mention right there.
Yeah, the axolotl, man, it's cool.
The last question is, if there was something that you could do or you would like to see done for mental health as a whole without any kind of restraint, what would it be?
Well, I could go on an hour-long diatribe, but I'm gonna leave it at this. Whether you're talking about addiction or mental health recovery, treatment does not end at the treatment center. And what does that mean? It means you need jobs. It means you need housing. It means you need post-acute care. You need long-term care. You need long-term follow-up. And some states and municipalities are great at this. Some lack the resources. But it can be as simple as just having somebody to talk to and having established, like, anonymous fellowship meetings or like support groups. I'm alive today. Yes, because I had the privilege of going to a wonderful treatment center. But if I had just gone out, not had any safety net, not had anybody helping me, not having anybody willing to give me a place to stay, willing to give me a job, I would have gone back. So whether it's an emotional relapse, a chemical relapse, or, a return to, losing all your tools and reconfronting your trauma and having it break you to self-harm or self-destructive patterns, there has to be an understanding of the fact that mental health and addiction is a lifelong struggle that requires a lifelong community integrated solution, because people who suffer from mental health conditions and addiction all often go together. But even if they don't and they stand by themselves, these are people, and these are people who can contribute to society, but they're people who require, just like a diabetic, just like someone who has hypertension or heart disease or cancer, it requires a health solution that is cognizant of the fact that it has to be holistic, it has to be tied together, institutions have to work together, people have to give addicts and people who struggle with mental health chances, they have to see them as people, and they have to see them as people who have untapped potential that can do positive and creative and awesome things.
Wow.
That's it, man. Thank you very much. Can you hang out? Can you hang out for a second while we wrap this up? We fly this thing home. So you just heard, like, there's no way to add anything to that, man.
There isn't. I just want to say one thing is that when people really sit down and listen to this, I think there's a lot of intelligent things said, and I think there's one thing that really needs to be addressed and understood by many is that, people often say you don't know what someone's going through, and you don't know this and you don't know that, so be kind. Or some people say, if they don't respond, then that means this, and that's not always the case. And I think that lesson was learned in this. We were talking with Benjamin who lives with Asperger's, and if he sits out and looks on, he's not necessarily a jerk or being judgmental. He has his own thing, so just let him do it.
I'll be over there. I'll be over there at the table. Just let me peep it out for a minute.
Yeah, I get it. No, I get it. But a lot of people are very quick to assuming and judging and saying, well, he's standing over there with his arms crossed, he must be, this, or she must be that. You know what I mean? It's like, enough of that. Just let people do what they want. If they're not harming themselves or you, let it go.
Absolutely, man. Wise words.
Nice. Dude, thank you very much for being available for this, man. It's awesome. Like I said, you can follow Benjamin Lerner on YouTube. You can get his videos on his YouTube channel. You can get his album Clean on Spotify, Apple Music, or of course through benjaminlerner.com. And you can listen to his radio show every Thursday, man, on WEQX. And if you're in the 518 like we are, and you're hearing this on Nippertown, that's 102.7. And EQX does an awful lot in this area, man. There's some great people. I believe Jason Keller is one of the DJs at EQX still. And like, we have a lot of local ties to Vermont. Vermont is like a really close close sibling state to us that I visit often. So, dude, it was a pleasure meeting you and having you on. So thank you very much, Tim. Until next time, man, be well.
Be safe.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Be above.
Be above.
Hey.
I'm scarred and you're scarred. My scars and your scars paint a beautiful picture that tells the story of the journey of your life, like the writing on a postcard. And if you're scarred inside, trying to come to terms with the past and moving on from a broken heart, I'll be right there with you. I want you to know, listen to my words and you'll never be alone. I'll be right there.
I used to hate all of the scars up on my arms and my face. Used to wish for pure perfection with no mark and no trace of any blemish in my image, cause it's hard to relate to other people acting shallow, cruel and heartless and fake. My insecurities got stronger and I started to chase after relief and found a feeling that was hard to replace. It left me permanently marked in ways so hard to erase, that now remind me how I hurt myself and tried to escape. It's hard for me to keep it real, but I'ma keep it 100. There's a reason why I wear the long sleeves in the summer. There's a reason why I edit all my posts and my pictures and change the way I look with filters with control and precision. But now I'm walking out the shadows with an honest admission. My complexion isn't perfect in its honest condition, and I got marks up on my body that were caused from addiction. Cause ain't nobody perfect, we all got our flaws and we're different. And there's some people who ain't really got no scars on their skin, but they'll relate to this cause everyone is scarred from within. And some obsess about their weight until they're awfully thin, preoccupied with what some other people possibly think. And some are scarred from hella trauma they didn't deserve, and so they take out all their hatred and resentment with words, or acting different cause they're so afraid to get themselves hurt, that every possible attempt to real affection is curved. truth. I'd rather live an ugly truth than live a beautiful lie. Because the truth is that my scars are really stupid to hide. Cause if somebody doesn't see the inner beauty inside, it's cause they're caught up in illusion, so the truth gets denied. I used to be so damn obsessed with what to do with my scars, but truth be told, my imperfection's my most beautiful part. And I'm just proud that there's a part of me that sets me apart, reminding me how far I've managed to progress from the start.
I'm scarred and you're scarred, my scars and your scars paint a beautiful picture that tells the story of the journey of your life, like the writing on a postcard. And if you're scarred inside, trying to come to terms with the past and moving on from a broken heart, I'll be right there with you. I want you to know, listen to my words and you'll never be alone. I'll be right there.
In this world, people tell us what to do. People tell us what to think. People tell us what to sound like. We even use vocal effects. We work so hard just to cover up our scars. I think it's time to show the real me. So here I am. No effects, no filters. Just me, scars and all.
I'm scarred and you're scarred, my scars and your scars paint a beautiful picture that tells the story of the journey of your life, like the writing on a postcard. And if you're scarred inside, trying to come to terms with the past and moving on from a broken heart, I'll be right there with you. I want you to know, listen to my words and you'll never be alone. I'll be right there.